Good afternoon. If we could ask everyone to try to take their seats, we're about to get started. Good afternoon and welcome to our 80th annual meeting. I'm Michael Nutter, Mayor of the City of Philadelphia and USCM Vice President. Well, with that, by just announcing who I am and a round of applause, I think I'll just leave. Seriously, I take it that by now many of you have heard that our president, Los Angeles Mayor and President of the conference, Antonio Villaraigosa, of course, will be presiding over this conference. Unfortunately, his flight was canceled last night. He will be with us shortly later on today, and I am merely standing in his stead until he arrives here in Orlando. And we expect, of course, to see him soon. As powerful as we mayors are, some things, of course, are just out of our hands. And unless the mayor has taken over completely, not only the airport, but also the airline that he was flying, it's just sometimes you just can't be where you want to be. We're going to have our awards ceremony this afternoon, but let me also recognize again our great friend and a great partner, certainly to me and Mayor Villaraigosa and all of us, and that is our second Vice President, Scott Smith. Scott? A couple other folks I need to recognize. First, can we give, Mayor Smith said it at the press conference, I certainly felt the same thing. I had not fully gotten through the gateway area at the airport today when I arrived, and the Orlando folks were already showing tremendous hospitality, making sure you got wherever you needed to go, volunteers out in the blue shirts, and that all comes as a result of great work and coordination by our host mayor, and that, of course, is Mayor Buddy Dyer. Can we please give him a big round of applause? I think it's clear already that we're going to have not only a great conference, but we're going to have a great time right here in Orlando. We have a number of our past presidents who are here, and past President Elizabeth Kautz of Burnsville. Please recognize her. Past President Don Pisqualik from Akron. Don. Past President and our reigning Dean, Joe Riley of Charleston. And let us be sure to give our great CEO and our president and leader of the staff, Tom Cochran, our executive director and CEO. Tom, thank you very much, and all the staff, thank you. Tomorrow morning, Mayor Dyer will welcome us officially to this beautiful city. Today, of course, again, I want to thank him for organizing such a fantastic host city program. Climate change is here to stay, and that is what all the science tells us. If you want to discover groundbreaking and path-breaking initiatives to confronting climate change, look no further than our cities. Some of the most innovative work to increase sustainability and lower carbon emissions is being done in our cities and metro regions all across America. Today, we are here to recognize the efforts of those mayors at the front lines of climate change policy. The Mayor's Climate Protection Awards are given to the mayors who have demonstrated significant leadership in combating climate change and bringing sustainable growth to our cities. Let me acknowledge the co-chairs of our Energy Independence and Jobs Task Force, Carmel, Indiana Mayor Jim Brainerd and Bridgeport Mayor Bill Finch. Please recognize them. Now, this session and our awards today are made possible by the strong support that Walmart provides for our climate protection efforts. And we are pleased to have Amy Hill, Senior Director of Public Affairs and Government Relations at Walmart, here today for these awards. Amy Hill is our awards program partner, overseeing Walmart's support for our annual Mayor's Climate Protection Awards. She is here today to talk about Walmart's commitment to sustainability and how it is being integrated into the brand and culture of the company. Amy?
Thank you, Mayor Nutter, for that introduction. Good afternoon, mayors. After 6 years of providing support for this event, it's an honor for me to be on the stage with you today. On behalf of Walmart, we are so proud of our partnership with the conference and look forward to driving even more progress together. We're honored to sponsor the Climate Protection Awards. This is just one example of how you mayors are innovating and leading on some of the most important issues we face as a nation. One question we at Walmart get asked a lot, as I'm sure all of you do as well, is how do you keep sustainability on the front burner during tough economic times? The answer is simple. There is no better time to have sustainability front and center. Frankly, you can't afford not to make sustainability a priority during tough times. We know that being sustainable is not only good for our communities and environment, but it's also good for business. Sustainability is really about doing things more efficiently, reducing waste in the system, and creating cost savings. We've been on our sustainability journey for about the same time we've partnered with you. And like you, we are learning every day. We have learned to set crazy goals and then work hard every day to achieve them. Our three main goals in sustainability are to be supplied by 100% renewable energy, to create zero waste, and to sell sustainable products. Since the inceptions of these awards in 2007, the applications from you cities are not only increasing, but the programs are becoming even more innovative. Whether you're providing electric car plug-ins for residents at city parking garages or reducing the cost of solar panels for your residents, you are all making a difference in protecting our climate. So on behalf of Walmart, I want to offer congratulations to this year's winners and to the cities receiving honorable mentions. Thank you all for your commitment to sustainability, and let's have a great meeting. Thank you.
So we are pleased to honor 12 mayors for their work on climate protection. And the first place award for Small City. We'll begin our awards today by making that award presentation. The winner is Mayor Denny Doyle of Beaverton, Oregon. Mayor? I think it's coming up behind you.
Short guy in the middle. Well, just want to say thank you to the U.S. Conference of Mayors for this very significant award. I wish staff was here back from the city of Beaverton, Oregon. We're right next to Portland. They have worked very hard. We put a couple of brand new groups together in the last 3 years, and I think this award demonstrates how seriously Beaverton takes its responsibility in the world. Interestingly, if I can share just one quick story, the first 2 years in office as mayor, we talked to over 5,000 of our 91,000 residents, and one of the top 3 issues that came up was sustainability, and they expected the city to be a leader. So we've stepped up in solar projects, CO2 projects, lighting projects, and it's relentless. And to the staff, I wish you were here because you make it happen. Thank you very much. And I also want to thank Walmart for helping this program, keeping it in front of all of us. Without their support, this just wouldn't happen. So thank you very much. Take care.
going to lose my job as stand-in. I got a little ahead of myself. There's a video that I was supposed to queue up. So let's run the video.
Well, we talked to about 5,000 people over a 2-year period, and in the top 3, they wanted the city to be more sustainable and practice the green practice that we hear and read about. So it was a pretty simple decision to build a team and start doing that.
Some of the city initiatives that we've implemented to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions include installation of 770 LED and induction streetlights, and we used energy conservation block grant funds from the Department of Energy to install those lights. We also used stimulus funds to install a 17.6 kilowatt solar array on our city library.
We said, what better place to demonstrate how we can use the sun to power a building than by putting an array on top of it. About 2 months ago, the installation was completed, and across the street at City Park, we also have a station there gathering power and feeding our electric recharging stations.
We have a great partnership with our electricity utility, Portland General Electric.
I think one of the most important partnerships we've had working together is promoting electric vehicles. The city of Beaverton was one of the first communities in our area to put in electric vehicle charging stations, making it easier for people to drive their cars without polluting.
What's unique about Solar Beaverton is that the city actually did the work and did the lead and went out to the community to engage them to install solar panels on their homes.
Solar Beaverton made going solar easy for me by showing me just how affordable it could be for a homeowner like myself. I had thought that it was going to be a lot more expensive, but the incentives really made it possible for me to buy solar panels for my home.
Solar Beaverton had a goal of reaching 220 installations in the Beaverton area. We exceeded that goal in 2 years and achieved 258 solar installations.
A couple of years ago, one of the gas station owners came to the city and said, I want to create the first totally carbon neutral, no power use, gasoline station in America.
We're proud to be the greenest gas station in America with the support of the city of Beaverton. We brought every element to this project. We have LED lighting and every single light bulb in this building. We have Chevron supporting us with biodiesel. We also have an EV charging station. We have over 185 solar panels up there to reduce our use of energy, and 1,800 square feet of grass on our canopy.
The Beaverton Central Plant is a city asset that serves over 300,000 square feet of building space with heating and cooling services.
Well, right now we're in a building that houses a central heating and cooling plant for this entire development. It's about 5 acres, and its reach goes well beyond here, but it takes natural gas, turns it into heats and cools, and it's 99.8% efficient.
All the buildings around us that we serve don't have equipment, and they don't have heaters and cooling systems that in most cases would be much less efficient.
I imagine we're saving 18 to 20,000 tons a year just by running this plant.
All of our buildings use renewable energy, 100%.
I'd really like to thank the U.S. Conference of Mayors and Walmart for this honor they brought to the city of Beaverton.
So now let me recognize the 5 mayors who won honorable mention in the small city category, cities under 100,000 in population. Please join me in congratulating Mayor Brian Barnett of Rochester Hills, Michigan. Mayor Barnett is being recognized for, quote unquote, 25 in 2. His challenge to staff to cut city building energy use by 25% in 2 years, and for his recycling initiatives program called Recycle Bank. Mayor Barnett. Next, let's recognize Mayor John Dickert of Racine, Wisconsin, for the Racine Energy Efficiency Program, also known as REAP, a program to help homeowners finance energy efficiency improvements. Mayor, come on up. Our next winner is Pleasanton, California Mayor Jennifer Hosterman for her city's Climate Action Plan. Mayor Hosterman. Right. And now we honor Mayor Wayne Powell of Manhattan Beach, California, for his city's, quote, Watt Watcher Energy Contest and its public awareness campaign to reduce climate emissions. Mayor Powell. And our final honorable mention in this particular category is Mayor Seti Warren of Newton, Massachusetts, for the Energy Smart Newton program. Now, he'll be arriving later on today, I'm told, but I also want to take a moment to certainly acknowledge his great leadership on protecting and working very hard to support our community block grant development program, trying to save it from further cuts. So let's give all of our honorable mention winners in the small city category a big round of applause. And now we'd like to recognize and honor our first place winner in the large city category, and that is Grand Rapids, Michigan Mayor George Hartwell. Mayor Hartwell was selected for his leadership in advancing his city's multi-year sustainability plan, which sets forth more than 200 specific economic, environmental, and social targets. Please join me in viewing a short video about Mayor Hartwell's winning program.
The City of Grand Rapids was one of the early signatories to the U.S. Conference of Mayors Climate Protection Agreement. I'm very proud of that. But more than simply signing an agreement and putting our name on a line, we've dedicated ourselves to carrying out the objectives of that. The city has embraced the whole notion of sustainability, and whether it's business or the NGO sector, faith-based communities, we seem to be moving together as a community toward a sustainable future.
City of Grand Rapids is considered a leader in sustainability planning. As a part of that effort, we're doing a lot of on-site energy planning. So for example, we just completed a 122 kilowatt project on our LEED certified water building.
The solar panels have just gone through the startup phase. They just got the interactive website up and running, so I can see what they're doing now. I can bring that up and I can start looking at it yesterday and today.
We are in front of the City Hall. The City of Grand Rapids, as part of its commitment to reduce energy consumption, has undertaken significant work on its 40-year-old building We started with replacing the 40-year-old single pane windows with double pane windows to make the building much more energy efficient. And at the same time, currently we're in the process of replacing an old existing roof with a more sustainable roof to address not only energy consumption, but to reducing the heat island index and improvements in light fixture replacement as well.
We received the go-ahead to upgrade the heating and cooling systems at 2 of our stations. And by replacing it with the geothermal heat, it's allowing us to not only reduce our energy costs, but also to reduce greenhouse gases by using this sustainable energy or renewable energy source. The system is a closed loop system, so we're not taking any water out of the ground or putting any back in.
In its effort to really look at economic opportunities, city has also been interested in helping develop electric vehicle infrastructure. So when folks come downtown, they can use electric vehicle charging stations while shopping or dining or having a wonderful experience in our city.
Well, of course, we have a strong interest in sustainability, and we have a sustainability plan. And the triple bottom line forms of the sustainability plan forms the platform or the foundation for how we do economic development. So it's critical in all of our discussions with people who wish to invest in the city, and I think it helps us produce really exceptional results. People working together and supporting each other, and all of them are interested in sustainability.
The East Hills Center is a double gold LEED certified facility. We have 2 gold awards, one for the core and shell and one for the interior. The core and shell was built on a former brownfields property. That's a contaminated site. It was contaminated by an abandoned gas station. It has been critical in revitalizing the neighborhood. Some of the aspects of the core and shell that are particularly interesting are that we have a zero stormwater runoff site. We capture all of the stormwater that falls on the building on site in a vegetated green roof and 2 rain gardens.
Well, I'm George Hartwell from Grand Rapids, and I want to thank my peers and colleagues at the U.S. Conference of Mayors for recognizing Grand Rapids with this very, very important award. Thank you.
Mayor Hartwell clearly is most deserving of this award and had planned on being with us today. Unfortunately, he cannot be here because he is delivering the eulogy for his longtime friend and neighboring mayor, Richard Root of Kentwood, Michigan, who passed away recently. Our thoughts, of course, go out to Mayor Root's family, friends, and the residents of Kentwood. And certainly we should do our best to keep all of them in our thoughts and in our prayers. Here to accept the award for Mayor Hartwell is Haris Alabushit, Director of the Office of Energy and Sustainability in Grand Rapids.
Well, thank you, Mr. Nader, Mayor Nader. I really appreciate it. And mayors and other conference participants, thank you so much. This is a true honor for the city of Grand Rapids. I've been asked by Mayor George Hartwell to represent him and the city of Grand Rapids today at the conference, as he could not be here. He sends his best regards, and together with the city of Grand Rapids is proud to receive this national recognition from the U.S. Conference of Mayors and Walmart. And we thank Walmart for the generous grant that will be used to support the sustainability efforts through a nonprofit organization in the city of Grand Rapids. This national recognition for the U.S. Conference of Mayors is one of many for the city of Grand Rapids, and Mayor Hartwell asked me to share with you a few wonderful things and exciting things that are going on in the city of Grand Rapids. I will be very brief, and you know, watching the video, I realized I do have an accent, so that's good. It's Bosnian, but it's there. Mayor Hartwell couldn't be here today, but I have to tell you that Mayor Hartwell has been a true leader and a visionary and has been working on sustainability-related efforts since 2004, which is a long time to be in the sustainability field. Many of you probably realize that too. He's been working on leveraging sustainability across different sectors, and you've seen that in our video. We have a group of people around the community that are engaged in sustainability, and that's very important for us to have that community-wide support, to have a City of Grand Rapids, our residents, our businesses, really standing behind in what we do for climate change protection and what we do for sustainability in the city and the region as well. The climate is very important. Climate protection is very important for us, and I will just to steal, in the words of Amy Hill from Walmart, this kind of leadership in protecting our climate is very important, especially as it's making a real difference in protecting the climate and improving the quality of life in our communities. And to add to that point, this kind of leadership is needed to help us create equitable communities with economic opportunities for all and to protect our environment for current and future generations. And that's where cities come in. That's where mayors like you come in and support those kinds of initiatives. The City of Grand Rapids has set a very aggressive and target-driven sustainability plan focusing on specific and well-defined economic, environmental, and social targets. And as Mayor mentioned in the video, as one of the early signatories of the U.S. Conference of Mayors Climate Protection Agreement, Grand Rapids is committed to reducing the greenhouse gas emission and demonstrating it through practical solutions on the ground and doing actual sustainability projects, as we call it. Doing applied sustainability is very important for us. I think that as far as the City of Grand Rapids go, our sustainability plan is really critical because it ties directly our planning for sustainability, climate protection plans, directly to the budget process. So that really captures the essence of everything that we do when staff is required to report how they're meeting the sustainability targets in their budget recommendations. So that's critical. I want to tell you a little bit about a couple of projects that have been going on in the city. And early in 2009, we completed our first greenhouse gas emission inventory, both for the city organization and for the entire community. And currently, the City of Grand Rapids is buying 22% of its of its electric load from renewable sources. That's a pretty big commitment, given that our city has over 350 city-owned buildings. And as part of that effort, we have been focusing heavily on reducing our energy consumption and reduced it over 15% since 2007. All of that money is then reinvested into actual renewable energy projects. So we try everything that we do to basically tie it directly to our sustainability plan and targets. Our city, our entire community is committed to sustainability, is committed to making the climate protection on being an important forefront for our region, for the city. The City of Grand Rapids, Mayor Hartwell, and community, thank you for this recognition. We really appreciate it, and we continue to working with you and with everyone else involved in addressing the issues related to climate change. Thank you again for this honor.
Harris, thank you again for your comments, and please express our deepest sympathies to Mayor Hartwell. Finally, we want to recognize mayors winning the honorable mention in the large city category, cities over 100,000 in population. Let us first congratulate Mayor Gregory Ballard of Indianapolis. He's being recognized today for his city's Sustainable Facilities Initiative. Mayor? Next, I want to recognize Mayor Mark Burrows of Denton, Texas, for his emissions reduction strategy, which now includes supplying 40% of the city's total energy needs with wind energy. Mayor Burrows could not be here today, so we're pleased that Catherine Barnett, the city's sustainability administrator, is here to receive the award on the mayor's behalf. Ms. Barnett. Our next award goes to Charlotte Mayor Anthony Fox. He's being recognized today for his Power to Charlotte initiative. Mayor Fox. This program consists of 17 energy and energy efficiency projects that focus both on city facilities and the community at large. We want to give congratulations to Mayor Jean Quan of Oakland, California for her Oakland Shines program, an energy efficiency program for businesses in her city. Unfortunately, Mayor Quan could not join us today, but our congratulations to her, of course, continues with this successful effort. The final award goes to Mayor Villaraigosa and the City of Los Angeles for their work on retrofitting 140,000 streetlights to LED fixtures. This one project will reduce their carbon emissions by more than 40,000 tons annually. Accepting the award for Mayor Villaraigosa is Ed Ibrahimi, Director of the Los Angeles Bureau of Street Lighting. Please join me in congratulating each of our honorable mention winners in the large city category, and you might as well just throw in all of our winners of the 6th Annual Climate Protection Award winners. Give them a resounding round of applause. Take care of everybody that was up here. We're about to move on to our Congress panel. Let me just do two things. One, I want to make sure that we again recognize Walmart for their sponsorship of these awards, their sponsorship of the lunch, and to all of our sponsors. And we'll see our corporate community here from time to time. These kinds of interactions are part of, at least in my opinion, what makes the conference a value-added event and activity for mayors coming from all across the country, taking time away from their cities. But winning these awards, submitting their programs and projects, and communicating this message that we really are in this together, and that our corporate community has a role to play, and in many instances wants to play an important role in connecting with our cities all across America. So we're very, very appreciative at the U.S. Conference of Mayors for our sponsors, for their participation, for their engagement with us. And so with that, let us recognize one more time Walmart and all of our sponsors who are here with us today. I mentioned earlier at the press conference and in the first part of these remarks, I talked about some of our past presidents, and those are folks who are also still serving as mayors. But as we all know, and any one of us will soon find out, once a mayor, always a mayor, and we are pleased to be joined by two great leaders. They're also past presidents and are consistent participants in the U.S. Conference of Mayors even after their official time in office concluded. And so I want to thank and recognize Mayor Doug Palmer, who is here with us. Doug Palmer. Mayor wants to know what happened to the one, the only, the incomparable. As I introduced him earlier, he's always wanting more, always wanting more. As I did at the press conference, and then the other mayor at the same table is Manny Diaz. At the press conference, Manny wanted to know why I didn't put some adjectives on him, and I said, what can you really say about Manny Diaz? He sets a certain standard. You say his name, you already know what the deal is. So Manny Diaz, Doug Palmer, and all the other mayors, please recognize these two great leaders here with us today. So again, you know that I'm standing in, so I have these remarks here. So I'm going to read them the way they were written. I'm going to completely stay on script, but you will appreciate my difficulty in saying this next sentence. Now, we will have a thoughtful discussion regarding where Congress is headed. How is it possible to have those two words in the same sentence? It is astounding to me. But that's what it says. That's what I'm saying. So, I'm sure I'll pay for that somewhere. As we all know, Washington failed to reach a budget agreement. And as a result, we face the very real possibility of a budget sequestration and a series of devastating cuts to key domestic programs. Numerous tax cuts are also set to expire at the end of this year. And despite strong bipartisan support, we still don't have a surface transportation reauthorization. Think about this. It's been almost 1,000 days since the last bill expired. We're headed towards some very serious deadlines, and it is not clear what Congress will or will not do. To help us understand what we should expect from Congress in the coming months, we have some of our top Congress watchers to lead our discussion and frame the debate. So first, I'm very pleased that we have with us Neera Tanden, President of the Center for American Progress, one of the nation's top think tanks. Ms. Tanden served as Senior Advisor for Health Reform at the Department of Health and Human Services and worked on President Obama's team in the White House to pass the Affordable Care Act. In 2008, Ms. Tanden was the Director of Domestic Policy for the Obama-Biden presidential campaign, and prior to that, she served as Policy Director for the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. Ms. Tanden currently has a regular column for the New Republic online and appears on a variety of news shows. Let us also welcome our second panelist, Mike Frank, who oversees the Heritage Foundation's outreach to Capitol Hill and the White House. The Heritage Foundation is one of the most respected voices for conservative policy in America. Mr. Frank served as Communications Director for Representative Richard Armey when he was a House Majority Leader, worked in the Office of the National Drug Control Policy, and served as Legislative Counsel to the then Representative William Denemeyer of California. Mr. Frank is a frequent guest on national broadcast and cable news programs, and his analysis and commentary appear regularly in Politico, National Review Online, and other outlets. And we are most fortunate to have Ron Brownstein as our moderator, which means that I don't have to do anything. Ron is the political director for the Atlantic Media Company, with responsibility for coordinating comprehensive political coverage at its publications. These include The Atlantic, the National Journal, The Hotline, and Congress Daily. Ron writes a weekly column on politics and policy that appears simultaneously in National Journal and the Los Angeles Times, and contributes to articles to National Journal and The Atlantic. Ron has twice been named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and has appeared frequently on Meet the Press and This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Additionally, he has been a repeat guest on Charlie Rose, even stepping in as a substitute host. Now let me turn this session over to Ron Brownstein. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. And I think I speak here for Neera and Mike. I guess I should start by thanking the mayor and the conference more generally for recognizing that in this age of 24-hour cable and the internet and talk radio, that one of our great national challenges is a shortage of opportunities for political pundits to have their views heard. So I want to thank you for taking just a small step toward rectifying that. We're here this afternoon to talk about what you can expect from Congress for the rest of this year. And it may be because I just met two mayors from Arizona. I am reminded of the words of an Arizona band, the Gin Blossoms, from some time ago. And in one of their songs they sang, if you don't expect too much from me, you might not be left down. So maybe that's a good way to start this. Last summer, when we faced the last time the Republican House, Democratic Senate, and President Obama had to reach an agreement on the debt ceiling, it was, in retrospect, I think, agreed all around a debacle, a deadlock that shook confidence in the public, in the markets. We have an even larger series of challenges that are coming together after the election. Is there any reason for optimism that the two sides can more effectively bridge their differences and reach an agreement this time than they did on the debt ceiling? Mike, would you start maybe?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a real honor to be here. And I'm reminded, by the way, the negative comments about Congress. Not too long ago, Gallup found the approval rating was in single digits, and that prompted John McCain to note that 9% approval for Congress was comprised entirely of members of Congress, congressional staff, and immediate family members of Congress. So, you know, you're talking about an institution that I think we would all agree, for different sets of reasons perhaps, is dysfunctional. The other thing I'd raise is two numbers, 18 and 28. 18 would be the number of legislative days between now and Labor Day, and 28 between now and the end of the planned congressional adjournment in early October. So that doesn't count days when they come in for bed check votes late at night on like Tuesdays to travel days. These are the real legislative work days. So when you think about the legislation important to you, think about those two numbers and look at where the different debates are right now. Some of these things might get resolved. I think the odds of a farm bill being resolved are higher than a highway bill. I think the highway bill will get punted into next year to some extent. I'm not sure how many months into it, but punted. And then we can talk in more detail about the what they call tax-mageddon, but there's much more than that too, because it does involve time-sensitive things like the doc fix, the physician payment numbers, reimbursement rates for Medicare coverage for physicians, and also the unemployment insurance coverage. So some of those things are all going to start expiring within a very few days of each other. So it's more than just, I think we calculated at Heritage, $494 billion of annual tax provisions expire all pretty much at once. When we did it, we're going to put out a study later this week on state-by-state numbers, for example. So of that 494, 34 billion tax increase would hit Florida, 20 would hit Pennsylvania. We tried to break it up by congressional district. In Manhattan, for example, the two districts there, it's about 9.4 billion a year in tax increases. So this is a very large a mosaic of tax increases that would all happen pretty much at the same time. So the instinct of Congress in recent years, I think increasingly has been to not resolve things and just punt them, but also to create deadlines and expiration dates in a lot of provisions in parts of the U.S. Code that used to be permanent. There's much more tax provisions now that are time sensitive and expire than ever before, and that creates this very, very dysfunctional dynamic up there that precludes them from doing other things. So that's one reason why things like farm bills, highway bills, FDA reform, all those kind of things suffer, because it's constantly working around expiration dates that are self-imposed. So it's a pretty negative assessment. I think Neera is the optimist in the group.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to overstate optimism about Congress, because I know that can lead to deep disappointment. So I would say that I understand how it can be mystifying that we can't get resolution around a transportation bill when it has had such bipartisan support for so long and has had leadership from both parties in support of it. But I do think that After the elections, I'm probably more optimistic than some, and let me say, and just for a minute, why. I really do think that we have had two elections that have pointed in really the opposite direction. Obviously, 2008, 2010 have brought together majorities behind policies and philosophies around governing that are really at odds. And while Washington seems almost patently ridiculous on a daily basis, and I can understand how mayors who are executives would be particularly frustrated, I think, especially at a time when we have so many economic challenges, I do think that the fundamental differences between the parties are as stark as they've ever been, and on really fundamental questions. And the differences between Democrats and Republicans on things like domestic discretionary spending, on programs like basic education funding, where there had been bipartisan support in the past, not so far past. I mean, bipartisan support during the presidency of George Bush. Transportation funding, community development block grants, a variety of issues, as well as things like Medicare and Medicaid and block granting Medicaid versus just keeping the program whole. And I think that's why Congress has essentially ground to a halt. And my view of this is that, it's always, I don't want to be overly optimistic, but you are seeing some recognition around the other key fundamental issue, which is revenues and the need for revenues to address our long-term fiscal challenges. And, you are seeing Governor Bush recognizing this, moderate senators like Senator Collins, some who are departing like Senator Snowe, but who will be around in the lame duck, as well as other senators, Lindsey Graham just the other day referencing revenues. And the issue last year is the same issue we'll face this fall, which is, can we have a balanced approach of revenue and long-term revenues as well as spending reductions in order to have a plan? There's bipartisan support for that in the country. There's bipartisan support for that amongst the parties. There has not been in the Congress because of the base of the Republican Party. But I do think you're already seeing a recognition that the Republican Party has to position itself in a different way.
Let's disaggregate this a little bit and talk about Tax-Mageddon or the fiscal cliff. And there's all the different pieces that are coming together. Mike, you alluded to that. The Bush tax cuts expire at the end of the year. The temporary payroll tax cut expires at the end of the year. The sequester begins on January 2nd with automatic cuts in defense and domestic spending. You mentioned the doc fix, the need for that. And then after all of that, we potentially hit the debt ceiling limit soon thereafter. Just an extraordinary confluence of challenges. Let me just start with a broad question. Do you believe in the end that Congress is going to need to deal with this all together in one sort of comprehensive package, or is it more likely to be dealt with sequentially as each deadline arrives?
I think the tendency in recent years has been to let it all come together and because different parts of that's a function of lack of trust. And the only way you can surmount that is by putting everything on the table and simultaneously cutting one large deal so that you don't move one bill and one side gets what they want and then the other side is left holding the bag if they don't get on the second part of some such sequential process. So I think this could all come together in one kind of ugly large package. And I think the tension's going to be, especially with the tax provisions, will be, can you simultaneously satisfy Republicans who want to see the changes in the tax code lead to more economic growth, or at least have the tax code not be an impediment to growth and job creation and so on, and satisfy on the revenue side the sense that any changes would not deprive the Treasury of enough revenue? How can you find that sweet spot? And that has some combination of lower rates and a broadened base. And therein lies the trick. How do you find a way to not trip all the normal wires when you do that?
And if you're expecting a comprehensive solution, do you expect a short term, in terms of between now and inauguration day, do you think it'll be a short term answer that kind of kicks the can down the road and delays permanent resolution, or will they try to achieve the big conclusion, lasting conclusion on the spending and the tax side?
Initially, I think that all the noise will be to try to do something permanent, but I think at the end of the day, it'll be again, another time-sensitive, kick the can down the road solution. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year. It'll depend on, obviously, how the presidential elections and congressional elections turn out in terms of how long that would be. But I don't see them solving all the world's problems in one fell swoop. The X factor, by the way, is if there's any kind of event. You know, if Europe does start to unravel in ways that really cause a kind of repeat of what happened in 2008 in some fashion, that action forcing event might up the ante and cause people to think outside the normal boxes.
Yeah. What do you think? How will you deal with it?
You know, I think the tendency of probably both sides, because I agree with Mike on this, because of a lack of trust, would be to try to negotiate everything at once, because each side will see if you negotiate one piece, you're just worse. They'll believe they're in a worse position for the second negotiation. So I think there will be an attempt. I think the most likely resolution of this is that, an optimistic, probably still optimistic, maybe not likely, but possible resolution is that there'll be a framework that is agreed to in the lame duck that calls for some, additional, hopefully, from my view, additional revenue spending targets that will give them time, if they all agree to it, a time to have a 6-month extension, et cetera, for the issues that are coming to the end, and give them the time to negotiate over that period. I do think that a 4% is all of these issues together are a 4% shock to GDP. That will be tough, regardless of who's president and who controls the Congress. And so I do think there will be a strong interest in resolving it. And I would say, this lame duck is, the number of issues are gargantuan compared to any other lame duck. But what's fascinating, in the previous lame duck, we had a lot more action on issues that hadn't been resolved in a year, because the elections were over and people felt like, okay, now they could actually deal with them. So I do think we're going to see a lot of positioning around these issues till Election Day, and then some fast flurry.
I'm not certain, but I think there may be a few Democrats in the room. And there was a pretty widespread sense among Democrats last year that President Obama ultimately got the short end of the deal in the debt ceiling, because the Republicans had more leverage. They seemed to be willing to go further to the brink. When you look at the dynamics here in this even larger negotiation that we may see, is the relative position of the two sides different than it was then, or do the Republicans ultimately have more leverage again?
Well, first of all, the most important thing will be the elections. But if the president is reelected, I think the way this package has been set up, in a way, some ways should favor Democrats, favor them more than it did before. Obviously, the debt limit is a critical issue, but in terms of the expiration of the Bush tax cuts and even defense and domestic discretionary cuts, although I recognize that these discretionary cuts are very, very difficult, the theory of the case is that the Republicans, this situation would force Republicans to come to the table, because both the defense sequestration and the expiration of all the tax cuts, of all the Bush tax cuts, should force some and there are some action on these issues from Republicans. And there is a theory that that's one of the reasons why you're seeing some Republicans raise the issue of revenue. These defense cuts are tough. They are a tough issue for both the Bush tax cuts and the defense cuts. And these are issues for Democrats too. But the question is whether they really pit two sides of the Republican coalition against each other in order to force more action. And I think, I, again, don't want to be overly optimistic, but we're seeing some movement that many people didn't expect at all until after the election.
Mike, Neera alluded to before the comments by Jeb Bush this week saying, contrary to the moment in the debate, that of course you would take a deal that was $10 in spending cuts to $1 in revenue, and as we've seen...
Not that I would take that,
not that,
yes.
but that a Republican should take that. Lindsey Graham, as she noted, has also floated the idea of revenue. Do you think a net revenue increase as part of a package would have more Republican support this time, post-election, than it did last summer, or would that ultimately depend on the result of the election?
Well, it would depend. First of all, I think that the scenario that is most conducive to a longer-term deal would be some kind of Republican-controlled Congress, and if Obama's reelected, that might force behavioral changes that otherwise might not occur. If it was a sweep on the Republican side, the Democrats might be more likely to dig in and resist any kind of big deal. And if the Republicans are isolated, say, just in the House, I think they would have more of an incentive to get locked and loaded and build, get into a bunker mentality. If you have that kind of dynamic like you had in the late 90s with Clinton and a Republican Congress, you might actually see the seeds of some kind of a broader deal. So that's, I guess, the first point. Would they be more receptive to any kind of revenues? I think that's going to, again, there's different ways of counting the revenues. If you take rates down, like some of the commissions were proposing, and broaden the base, there's some who would be on the pro-growth side of the Republican Party who would say, if you get the top rate down somewhat below 30 in the mid to high 20s, you're going to get a lot of growth, and you're going to get debates. You're going to get an Arthur Laffer maybe doing some models saying this is actually going to be a net growth of the economy. So however you score the broadened base might be less important. So I could imagine there being a pretty robust discussion about that, but it has to have some kind of major reduction in the rates to get the Republican-type mindset into the discussion.
I've heard in the last few days this idea. One of the hurdles here, obviously, for Republicans is virtually all of them have signed the pledge not to raise taxes, the Grover Norquist pledge. However, I've heard it noted that if Obama refuses, whether he wins or loses, he will be president on December 31st. And if he refuses to sign any extension of the Bush tax cuts, and they go down on December 31st, if you vote in the first week of January to restore some of them, but not all of them, are you technically violating your pledge as a Republican not to raise taxes?
This is like Talmudic
It is, but it would seem to be, the answer would seem to be no. What would you say? Do you think Republicans might find that
This is either a Jesuitical or a rabbinical distinction here. I'm not sure. Yeah, I've heard that discussion. In fact, I've heard it with Grover himself. And I forget exactly how they frame it, but there is the original intent or the original concept of the pledge did not include the sense that a large part of the tax code would expire.
Right.
So the fact that so many provisions now have expiration dates may have altered their understanding of what they meant initially. So that, again, but you're raising a very, very good point about the pledge and all that. But there's a bigger point about if you end up lowering rates and broadening the base, are you going to be beholden to a static model that may show that you don't account for any kind of economic growth that would come from lower rates? And do you really want your pledge to be subject to that? That's an interesting question in and of itself.
I just feel compelled to point out that we did dramatically lower the rates over the course of this decade and from 2001 to this period. We could say many things, but we did not get dramatic increases in growth over any previous period.
But the wealthiest folks who benefited from the lower rates account for a lot more of their individual tax revenue now than they used to. It's over 40 cents on the dollar. When Reagan came in, it was about 18 cents on the dollar.
We did lower them from 39 to 36. But we don't need to.
No. But going to your point, which is the question. 10 days to the day after the Bush tax cuts were passed, there were fewer people working than on the day they were passed. And that's almost never happened in American history, to have a whole decade with a net job loss. I think the last time was 1929 to 1939 is the last time that was true. And we had big job growth after Reagan cut taxes. We had big job growth after Clinton raised taxes. And then we didn't really have any job growth after Bush cut taxes. So why is there optimism that either way, this is the key lever that is going to move us out of this very slow job growth that we're experiencing?
Well, I think it's one of several. If you talk to most Republican lawmakers, they're more focused than ever on the effect of regulations and the regulatory activities of different agencies than I've ever seen before. In fact, you could look at there's probably between 30 and maybe 40 separate votes in the House this Congress that target one or another regulatory activity of a whole variety of agencies. So that's a very, very large thematic that didn't used to be as prominent as it is today. Taxes is one part of that, and spending and the level of debt and what the debt does in terms of crowding out other options, both in the private sector and in terms of public sector spending, is another sense. You did have a time when debt was a lot smaller part of GDP and so on, that there was a view that you could sustain constant deficits of 2, 3, 4% of GDP, but now the view is we've kind of tripped a wire and gone beyond that. So there's three parts of the concern. One is the tax code, one is the regulatory state, and the third would be the overall level of debt. And depending which member of Congress you talk to on the Republican side, they may lead with different parts of that triad, but they would probably agree that all three are important.
Neera, beyond some of the more tactical proposals in the American Jobs Act, do you think there is a vision among Democrats broadly and the administration specifically about what a second-term agenda would be that would produce more rapid job growth than we've seen? Which certainly, you can talk about the, whether what Obama did avoided, falling off the cliff, but it has not recovered as fast as they had hoped or anticipated. So, is there an agenda? Do Democrats have a sense of what would be the key steps to get the economy moving faster over the next 4 years?
Well, let me say just a few things about that. First, if you look at the challenges we're having in the economy, and I hate to, I know that every single person in this room is an expert because you're dealing with economic decisions every day that impact real communities, and cities have been an area of growth. The real, what we've seen is that we have a lack of demand that is particularly, the demand cycle is not revving up fast enough. And while we've had private sector job growth overall, that demand problem still exists. Now, there are particular strategies to deal with that issue, which is to help foster essentially the demand in the country, both through private and public sector actions. So, if we look at the recent jobs numbers, we've had challenges in a particular set of areas. Construction has been a challenge. Public sector layoffs have been another particular challenge. And there are particular solutions for those issues. It is odd to me that when we have the economy that we have, that we can't get resolution to create some level of certainty around transportation funding. Because obviously when we hear lots of arguments about certainty, it seems to me having that certainty of transportation funding would be particularly helpful in an economy like this. But I think the broad issue is that we have, essentially, the president has offered a series of particular solutions. I wouldn't call them strategic or tactical. I would call them particular answers to the challenges this economy is having, and because we are seeing particular areas. And the difficulty Democrats have, I'd say, and just being 100% frank, is when we can't get action in the Congress on these issues, which seem relatively obvious challenges in the economy, when we can't even get a bill on transportation funding through, does it seem realistic to produce a series of ideas that at the end of the day will be dead on arrival because we can't get action on them? Now, my view is the president should set up ideas around competitiveness for our economy that helps create those jobs, and I think manufacturing is a big area for education, higher education. But I think that's an area that he should dwell on in his convention speech, because that'll set up the second term.
Mike, as you're answering, can you talk a little bit about transportation and what you think we might see between now and Election Day?
Yeah, I was going to actually raise that. I think what's really important when you think about why the highway bill is stalled the way it is now has a lot to do with the earmark bans that the Republicans embraced, especially in the House. That was a lubricant. That got a lot of lawmakers in the past. One reason you had these large bipartisan majorities was a lot of members who otherwise might have a fiscal concern or some philosophical concern was allowed to say, I can vote for this because there was X number of projects being funded in my district. I think they were in the thousands at one point in the bill. You take that away, and if you're a chairman of a committee or a leader in the House and you're trying to cobble together a majority and you can't use that tool, that makes it harder. That clarifies some of the philosophical concerns. When Paul Brown of Georgia offered an amendment to assent, I think it was, to conferees, to say that keep the revenue within the scope of what's raised by the gas tax and don't go into general revenues. He got 83 votes for that. So if you're John Boehner or Kevin McCarthy or Eric Cantor and you're looking at that, you see that you have a large number of your own caucus that has this sort of a fiscal concern that could be enough that makes you need to get a lot of Democratic votes to get over the top. So, it compounds it. And if you don't have those earmarks to lubricate the system, your tools to pull together a majority are much less. Now, a lot of us at Heritage and elsewhere happen to like the idea of getting rid of earmarks as just a working proposition. So, this is sort of a manifestation of now you have to actually grapple with the policy battles and not have it be kind of taken over by
I would
earmarks.
just, if I could interrupt, I think they have to, that's what being a leader is. And if you can't produce a bill when even the Senate can produce a bill, obviously there's issues in that caucus on both sides. I think that's, that just, people lose confidence in the ability of Congress to do anything, as we're seeing.
And speaking of doing anything, is there anything between now and the election? What are the most significant things, if any, that you expect them to complete?
Farm bill, probably.
Farm bill?
I think that has the Farm bill, cuts across a lot of different types of constituencies, between the food stamp money being in there, but also a lot of Republicans having such rural constituencies that they use the Farm Bill programs for one thing or another. A lot of them check their free market philosophy at the door when they vote for the Farm Bill. So, I think they'll find a way to get majorities there.
Given that the posture of both sides is to pass a student loan bill and they're arguing about how to pay for it, I believe that it seems likely that we will pass the student loan bill. We will likely, unfortunately, have just a pure extension on the transportation bill rather than a resolution. And I don't think we'll have the appropriations process work properly.
And so the big decisions, I think everyone agrees, is there any way there have been some kind of maneuvering by the House Republicans hoping to force Democrats to deal with the expiration of the tax cuts before the election? Can you see any way that happens, or is it going to be post-election when we're really going to be making these decisions?
The House will set out a marker, and then before the election, and all the activity will be post-election. And when your earlier question about will it all be bundled together or could it move separately? One of the things going on here is that you do have more than one kind of must-pass dynamic at work, so that you can imagine maybe even separating out some of the appropriations issues in a CR that could have a longer lifespan and deal with the rest of it through a debt ceiling vehicle. That's one reason why this is not even three-dimensional chess. I think it's five.
Wow. Neera, I'm guessing, obviously the choices matter, but I'm guessing there are a lot of people in this room and a lot of people in the country who would say, look, whatever decision you make, just make a decision. Just reach an agreement. So I'm kind of wonder, what is the source that will put pressure on members from both parties and the president after the election to get something done? What can groups like this, or business groups, or labor, what can people do who just simply say, look, we've got to move forward in some direction. We can't have this paralysis. What can they do?
Well, the 4% shock to GDP is a pretty we really don't have more threats to governance than that kind of threat. Even with the debt limit deal, the challenge of the debt limit deal, I think, for Democrats was that there was a belief, probably wrongly, but there was a belief that the Republican base, that Republicans wanted a deal on the debt limit, mostly because the biggest issue was the credit rating, and that was a Wall Street issue as well. So, throughout that process, there was this belief that the Republican base was pushing for a deal, or there were elements of the Republican coalition that was pushing strongly for a deal. And I think we determined through that process that some voices in the coalition are stronger and control the Republican Party more than others. But at this point, we will have gone through an election. If the president is reelected, then, I think it seems likely that there are Republicans who will say, look, we tried, and now we're facing 4% GDP, and we're elected every 2 years. The president's not going to be reelected again, and Democratic president won't be reelected for 4 years. So if we have a 4% shock to GDP, I'm going to own that more as a member of Congress than he is. And so I hope that will create a series of incentives. I think it will create incentives on House Democrats, too. It won't just be Republican Democrats. I believe Boehner will have to put together a deal that will likely need Democrats to pass, because there's a theory that they can't get, they always lose 50 people in their coalition. And so I think that is an action forcing event. And I would say just on the issue of the tax cuts, I do believe Senator Reid will hold the line. And what has been interesting so far is that Democratic senators who are in tough re-elections are finding that the issue of taxes is not hurting them as much as it may have. And so I think, if Republicans will try to pass in the House, Democrats will pass in the Senate or get a majority behind expiration of most of the Bush tax cuts except for the upper income, and then it'll hold.
So, Mike, going back to the point there, what Nero was noting was that there was a sense during the debt ceiling that some of the institutions that you thought would have leverage on this Republican caucus did not. To the extent that there are interests across the country, I think pretty broadly, who just want these guys to reach an agreement, what can groups what can mayors do? What can business groups do? Or are they basically, don't really have much leverage ultimately to affect this decision?
Well, last year there were a lot of people saying, and I think I was among them, that if there was a downgrade in the credit rating, then all kinds of consequences would flow from that, and it didn't seem to happen. And it's on both sides. It's not like the credit rating went down and a lot of Democrats suddenly decided we needed to fundamentally overhaul entitlement programs. So what has to happen? It seems to me that Neera's point is a good one about the 4% of GDP, but I would add a wrinkle to it, which is as you get closer to some kind of a deadline, will the markets start to see, look, they've passed whatever the date is, they've adjourned, and they still haven't resolved this stuff. Do you see a market reaction? Do you see the stock market start to go down? Do you see Standard & Poor's or Fitch or whomever lower the credit rating again? It has to be some external event caused by what is not happening on the Hill that'll then in turn come back and cause the Hill to act. But absent that, if everything goes on its merry way and the markets internalize things and everyone seems to still be doing fine, relatively speaking, there's no incentive for Congress to act.
I want to bring the audience in for questions, but Neera, can I just real quick first go back to the flip side of your scenario? You're kind of painting the 97 scenario. If there's a Republican Congress and Obama gets reelected, they'll say voters have not sorted this out. They've kind of sent us back here to work with each other. We have no choice but to make a deal. But what about the reverse scenario? If President Obama loses, what incentive, if any, would he have under any circumstances to extend the Bush tax cuts temporarily that would then allow a President Romney to have the leverage of how to ultimately resolve it? If Obama loses, wouldn't his incentive be overwhelming to just let them all go down on December 31st and force Republicans to pass them again after Inauguration Day?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I think I can't see a scenario where you might try to attempt a sort of bridge mechanism, but he would need some kind of deal to just capitulate on the extension of the Bush tax cuts. Would dramatically harm the ability for Democrats to leverage a reasonable deal going forward.
Yeah. All right. Let's see.
That seems like doing that would trigger all kinds of negative economic repercussions, like you indicated, and that would, if President Romney inherited that. Then that would exonerate him from a lot of blame down the road. It seems like an odd political
this election
decision.
whether that kind of economics is true or not.
You get how much dispensation you get for what you inherited. Let's bring in the audience. I don't know. Do we have microphones out here for folks to ask questions? But anybody? Yeah. Let's see. We do. It looks like we have a couple microphones. Yeah. So we have some questions from the. Do we have anyone? Yes, right over here.
Thank you for coming today. Appreciate it. I'm going to keep some of my comments to myself because I think it'd be better for all of us. I'd like you to be honest and frank with us and tell us what's going to change. Because I'm just speaking for myself as a mayor who have watched the policies that the one party admits to help us out not work, while the other party is taking away the very issues that help us survive. And let's be candid, the main source of GDP in this country is in cities. Yeah. but that's ignored on Washington. So why don't you, can you tell me honestly what is going to change? Because from our perspective, it doesn't matter. Unless one party has all 3 houses, nothing is going to change. There's going to be total stagnation, there's going to be more fundraising, and less work. And as I've asked Congress last year, last December, we were in Washington, when are you guys going to take a pay cut? Because most of us have. You're not doing your job in Washington. We're doing our job back home. You guys are making a lot more money than we are, but what's going to change? Because we're not seeing any of it. If you get one house that goes Republican, all 3 houses that goes Republican, we know what's going to happen. If you get all 3 houses that go Democratic, we know what's going to happen. Outside of that, nothing's going to happen. So tell me where I'm wrong.
Mr. Mayor, could you just identify yourself real quick?
Mayor John Dickert from Racine, Wisconsin, home of the best tasting water in the country. Thank you.
So can I take
Yeah.
that? Again, I don't want to be overly optimistic, but I would say that Bill Clinton ran in '96. He'd gone through a government shutdown with the Republicans. It was the year before, there was a lot of hostility. There was some issues passed in the previous few months when Republicans thought that, in the House, thought that they may not win the presidency. What you are able to forge significant deals, and I don't want to be overly optimistic, but we did see action on things that people did not believe would happen, on the START treaty and the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, on a few issues in the lame duck last time when the election is over. Now, I agree, it is a perversion of democracy that you can only accomplish things after an election and not before. It perverts the normal accountability that should happen in our system. But the truth is that people aren't being held accountable for doing nothing. And until they are, we are going to see some level of gridlock. Now, again, we have 4% GDP on the line. That is, if that doesn't concentrate the mind, I don't know what does. But, and those are the kinds of decisions that mayors have to make and resolve, because you are looking at economic catastrophe if there are not some joint decisions. So I'm hoping that can create a counter bulwark against doing nothing.
Yeah, what's going to have to change, excuse me, I think an external event is what keeps coming to mind because of the way the parties are aligned right now. There's no daylight anymore, overlap really in an ideological way. Ron has done that work on his scorecard, which I encourage you all to look at. No overlap anymore between on the liberal or conservative liberal spectrum between Democrats and Republicans, whereas in the past there used to be enormous levels of overlap in the 1980s and so on. In the 1990s, Bill Clinton, right after that shutdown, he negotiated, ended up signing a welfare reform bill in August of '96, and then in the spring of '97, a pretty big budget deal. It had some weird things in it, like the sustainable growth rate for physicians, the doc fix, but it also had a lower capital gains rate and so on. Bill Clinton was able to go into territory where most Democrats didn't want to go and negotiate, and the Republicans were willing to give him some things along the way as well. So there was some overlap, and they were scathed by the shutdown. So they were kind of working off a weak point there. Here, absent there being an external event, I think that the way the sides are designed these days, it's almost 2 tribes, and never the twain shall meet. And unless you get that forceful event to force them to come together, I think we're going to go along as far as we can until something happens. And I hate to say that, but that's just the way it seems to be right now.
I mean, I think the idea that both parties are unwilling to compromise was belied by the fact that during the debt limit debates, the president was willing to compromise on entitlements. Much to the chagrin of many Democrats, he put significant entitlement reform on the table. And so I think the idea that people are equally inflexible when it comes to resolving the nation's problems.
He didn't put anything specific on the table.
Well, no.
It was a generic kind of a broad number that no one ever...
Raise the Medicare age, retirement age for Medicare is a relatively...
I mean, I think just empirically, the Republican Party at this point is more homogenous and probably does face more centrifugal pressure. I mean, there's just clearly less tolerance for, as you said, I mean, in this kind of tribal way. But I want to maybe follow up on that question and kind of, one thing we see every day, as you mentioned, Mike, I mean, that the parties are deeply divided at this point. Their prescriptions for how to go forward are almost diametrically opposed. On the other hand, maybe the bottom will fall out if the economy gets bad, but if it doesn't, the election will show us to be very closely divided again. I mean, many people are expecting, again, if the economy gets worse, things could move sharply toward the Republicans, but if it stays where we are, we could see a very close to a 50-50 result again as we started this decade, the 2000 election. We were talking about the 50-50 nation, a presidential race decided narrowly, a Senate that's very close to 50-50. So if the parties are deeply divided and the country is closely divided, how do we move forward from that? If each side is basically going to say, we're waiting for the voters to deliver us, an emphatic victory that allows us to simply impose our will on the other, they may not get that anytime soon.
Well, for example, entitlements, how do you break through that logjam? One thing that has to happen is the average person has to understand that the baseline of future for all these programs is not what it is today. The baseline future is that the programs fall apart. And that if you show them that you do reforms in order to give them something rather than nothing, they might be more open to that. On taxes, I think the same thing is true. They had that we talked about earlier, some kind of sweet spot between a broadened base and lower rates that both parties could align around. Ron Wyden's been involved in a lot of these kinds of discussions with a number of Republicans. So there's potential there, but I still think it's going to require some kind of external forcing event to bring them together to the table and make them deal in good faith with each other.
Where's Angela Merkel when you need her? Over here.
Not resolving the problems of Europe.
Can you identify yourself, Mr. Mayor?
Mayor Bill Gluba from Davenport, Iowa. Could you tell me, do you see any movement at all, or do you anticipate any on the 60-vote veto situation in the United States Senate? I mean, we can't do anything without 60 votes. We talk about the House, but you can't do much more in the Senate effectively. I mean, what do you see happening, if anything? Thank you.
Interestingly enough, Senator Reid has moved dramatically on the issue of filibuster reform at the beginning of this Congress. He was against filibuster reform. Now he is for it. I think something to actually remind people is that, we've had the filibuster for a very long time. We are at unprecedented levels of use of the filibuster. Used to be something that was used, we've had the power for a very long time. Used to be something that was used rarely. Now it's used daily, multiple times in a day. And so you could change the entire structure of the system if people just went back to the norms and rules that people basically used before. You wouldn't have to have structural reform. There was a lot of concern also that people will use the nuclear option and eliminate the filibuster, and either party could do that, and then we would have a place where it'd be 50-50, and 50 votes to pass in the Senate. So I think that the gradual shift has been towards some level of action. I would expect something in the next Congress or two, in part because people recognize the system is impossible now.
On the filibuster question, one reason why there's so many filibusters is because the way Leader Reid has used his prerogative as being the majority leader. He gets the right of first recognition when he goes down to the floor, and a bill will be on the floor, and he will do something called filling up the amendment tree, which means he offers two technical, non-substantial amendments to a bill that precludes anyone else from any other senator from offering amendments. And the only way a senator who wants to have his or her voice heard in a subsequent debate is to filibuster. And then Reid files cloture right away, which is forcing the filibuster vote. So he's set a land speed record for the most times he's filled up that tree, over 51 times, which I think is more than the last 6 majority leaders together. So he's fundamentally changed the way he operates on the Senate floor, and it's done in a way that basically precludes debate. The Senate is supposed to be the saucer that cools the cup, according to George Washington. It really isn't anymore. He's making it more like the House, which in a way is not surprising because there's a record number of ex-House members now in the Senate. So they kind of like the idea of just being able to force stuff through quickly without much debate, without much amendment, especially without any amendments that might be politically questionable or harmful to the party.
This is like a chicken and egg question. I mean, the defenders of Reed would say the Republicans did it, but that's just part
Well,
of the
and I would just add that, we are experiencing the highest levels of party line voting in Congress, the people who have studied this, since Reconstruction. And in many different ways, as we've written in National Journal, we are evolving toward a quasi-parliamentary system. The problem is that because of the filibuster, you have a quasi-parliamentary system without majority rule. And there's no other country in the world that tries that because it simply does not work. If as the president, it is that difficult to get support from the other side for anything you want to do. And it's not a coincidence that George Bush could not get a single Democrat on Social Security or Obama could get a single Republican on health care. It is becoming more and more difficult to get crossovers on these major high-profile issues because of all the centrifugal pressures in the parties. Once you have that world, that quasi-parliamentary world, a 60-vote majority requirement makes it a very narrow eye of the needle through which to govern because one party gets 60 votes about every 30 years. So let me just close with a question for you guys. The audience has been very patient. Yeah, go ahead. Very patient in listening to a very substantive, meaty, nutritious discussion of policy. As dessert on the way out the door, I want to ask each of you a political question. And I'll start with you, Mike.
Is that for tomorrow?
No, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative here. Mike, if Mitt Romney does not win on the day after the election, who is the front runner for the Republican presidential nominee? Front runners for 2016.
Well, I'd say all the people on the VP list who are viewed as not having enough experience today. That's Christie, Ryan, I think Rubio's in there. Those three would be probably 1, 2, 3. Maybe one of the other governors like Martinez in New Mexico.
And Neera, you know what's coming next. Whether or not Barack Obama wins in 2012, does Hillary Rodham Clinton run for president again in 2016?
Well, I'm taking her at her word for what she says publicly and privately to me, which is that she's not running for president again. And if she doesn't run for president, I mean, it will be a significant jump ball. O'Malley, Cuomo. I think Cuomo is positioning himself well.
Do you think there'll be a significant number of people who try to change her mind?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
But they're already trying to change her mind.
All right, well, we've lifted from the mire of Congress to the airy speculation about 2016. Thank you all for listening, and I'll return you to your regularly scheduled programming.
Thank
you. Let's thank Ms. Tandon, Mr. Frank, and Ron Brownstein for doing just a great, great job. Thank you very, very much. We have one more important piece to cover, and that is talking about the political engagement of young people, and that's our final theme for today. We're extremely fortunate to have Trey Grayson with us today to help us understand the political views and the attitudes of our young constituents. Trey Grayson is the director of the Harvard Institute of Politics, with which we've had a long-standing relationship through our new mayor's program. So, Trey?
Thanks, Mayor Nutter, and it is a great relationship. Many people that I've seen since we got here yesterday have either been participants in the seminar or have helped instruct us at our seminar, and so I thank you, Mayor Nutter, and Tom Cochran. One of the things that the IOP does is we have a survey of 18 to 29-year-olds all across America, so not just college students, on their political views and their views towards public service. All of the information that I'm going to tell you today is available in much greater detail on our website, which is www.iop.harvard.edu, or you can send me an email or tweet KYTrey, and I'll get back to you with the top line data, anything you need. But let me give you some takeaways of our survey, which we've been doing now 21 times over the last 12 years with a professional pollster, and our students helped to design this poll, so it's what the students want to know about their peers from across the country. First is the millennials, and for the purposes of our survey, we're looking at 18 to 29-year-olds, are incredibly diverse. They're only 58% Caucasian, 21% Hispanic, 12% African American. And as you get in the younger ages, it becomes even more diverse. Second, and as mayors, you may not be surprised to hear this, but you'll be flattered to hear this, we recently asked them to rate trustworthiness of major institutions, and local government fared better, significantly better actually, than both state government and federal government, so yay mayors, yay cities, and much higher than Wall Street, but that's to be expected. Yeah, so give yourselves a round of applause. The U.S. military and the Supreme Court were the two highest institutions. Since our survey, which was done in late March, compared to the one previously in the fall, in November, the outlook towards America, towards the future, and towards the economy has improved. The right track, wrong track, which we ask in every survey, is still negative. It's still underwater, but it's only 2-to-1 underwater instead of 4-to-1 underwater as it was in the fall. So that's an improvement. And the economy, when we ask an open-ended question about what's the biggest issue, the economy got 75% of all responses in the fall. It was still number one, but it was down to only 58%. They're concerned about a few other issues, which means it may be that the economy's, at least for these individuals, either getting better or they're changing their perspective when they're looking at it. We do horse race questions when it's presidential years. You won't be surprised to know that President Obama is in the lead among this generation. It was an important part of his winning coalition 4 years ago. He was up 17 points over Governor Romney, which was an increase from the fall. Interestingly, Romney's numbers stayed exactly the same even as the primary season progressed, but the president brought some support back in. He was up 43-26. As I said, a 17-point lead. And his approval rating had an uptick from the fall. He was back up to 52%. Most of that came from better numbers among Hispanic young Americans. Everybody else stayed pretty flat. His approval ratings on issues, for the most part, are under 50%, but his handling of the economy went up a little bit. A couple things that just are broader observations that we've seen over the last couple of years. One, there appears to be a split among millennials between 18 to 24 and the 25 to 29-year-olds. That younger group is less supportive of the president. And in fact, we saw this in our poll, and then in Wisconsin in the elections last week, there was a split. If you looked at the exit polling, Scott Walker won, won the under 25 vote, and he lost by over 10 points the 25 to 29-year-old vote. So we think there is this split. We can talk about why that might be at another time, but it's something to watch. Second thing is, when you look kind of holistically, is there's a bit of a libertarian streak among these millennials. They're much more supportive of gay and lesbian relationships. But at the same time, last fall, we asked them about Social Security reform and private accounts were their preferred option of fixing Social Security. And if you ask them if they want to give up some personal freedoms to make the country a little bit safer, a very small percentage, only in the 20%, said yes, that they are willing to do that. One final note to conclude with, and this is a bit of a cautionary note, we asked them about their willingness to vote and be involved and use social media to support their candidates and their causes. And we're not seeing the kind of ramp up you would expect as you lead up to a presidential election. It doesn't look like this group, at least in late March when we did this survey, was seeing the kind of interest and excitement about the presidential race that you might expect. And so I suspect you'll see over the next few months the president continue to try to address this important coalition of his win back in 2008, as well as you'll see Governor Romney talk a lot more about the economy to try to address their number one concern. But right now, they're not as engaged and as interested in participating as they were in 2008. So again, all of this information is available on our website, iop.harvard.edu. Send me a tweet at KYTREY, K-Y-T-R-E-Y. I'm really from Kentucky, KY. Or shoot an email, or just look it up on Google, and we're happy to talk with you. Thanks for this opportunity and for our partnership.